Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Hello and welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast. Welcome back. We are so excited to have you with us week in and week out. So today we are going to address a question that was actually emailed to us. So the question reads, I'm curious if anyone offers credit repair along with financial coaching. I'm wondering if the two kind of go hand in hand or if they are just two completely separate journeys for clients. I'd love to hear any and all thoughts and feedback on the topic. So,
good question.
Maria.
Yes,
what
sir.
Are you thinking? What are you thinking?
I think it's a really great question. And B, I don't think that I don't think it's super uncommon for people to question this as financial coaches. There are a couple things. One, I think that whether or not you want to integrate them is probably going to have a lot to do with what your personal overarching thought is about credit in general. So as a coach, if you are like anti-credit or anti-credit score, you're probably going to have a different view than somebody who is more along the lines of, let's just meet the client where they are and figure out what we need to do to help them move forward. So with that being said, do you want to share your thoughts on just credit in general, or how do you want to start this? I have thoughts, but I want to make sure that we do both.
Sure. So I personally think that these two worlds can go hand in hand for sure. Mm-hmm. I don't think that, you need to be like a financial coach. And then if someone says, can you help me with my credit? And you're like, oh no, I can't do that. Like you need to reach out to this person. I don't think that's really necessary because I think that's a part of what we do.
Okay.
Now, my opinion on credit, I will say that a few years ago, I was like totally against it. Mm-hmm. And I did like everything that, you may hear about people who are against credit, like they're totally debt free. I bought my house with no credit. So I did the manual underwriting process. I have credit now because I have a house. Mm-hmm. But when I bought my house, I had no credit. And I personally really like that lifestyle. And I just think it's a much easier lifestyle. But I understand that not everyone agrees and it doesn't work for everybody, especially with different areas that credit can be used for. Mm-hmm. So when people approach me and they ask me about like helping to improve their credit and stuff like that, like my initial reaction is not just to say like, oh yeah, I can totally do that. My initial reaction is to ask them why they want to do it. And then, if they're like, well, I want to like buy a new car or I want to buy a house or whatever, I would be like, we could totally do that if you'd like, but are you open to hearing different approaches? Yes, sure. Why not? Cool. Well, here's this approach to buying a new car. Mm-hmm. Here's this approach to buying a house. Is that something that you're interested in? Yeah, I think so. Okay, cool. Well, let's teach you more about it. Let's get you on that path and let's make it happen. No, that's not what I'm interested in. Okay, cool. We'll work with things with the way that you think is best and what you would like to do. And I'll help you kind of like get into that direction and help clean things up to kind of raise that score a little bit. Mm-hmm. While also putting you in a good position too, that, is stable and that is protected and stuff like that. So, I personally, my view on credit is that like, I don't think that you really need it for a lot of things. However, there are certain things that it certainly can make easier.
Yeah. Like I know, I think I mentioned before that I work for an insurance company, and I've seen some people who have come back either super high or maybe even uninsurable based almost entirely on their credit score because they really didn't have any sort of any claims that they had put in, and they didn't have any tickets or accidents or anything like that. So it was really based on their credit score. Now, having said that, there are companies out there that absolutely specialize in low credit score. I know that sounds weird, but like that is the customer that they serve best. And so I just don't happen to work for one of those companies, and that's why it would have an effect on that. So there are things that you can do to, shop around and that kind of thing. It certainly doesn't have to make a huge difference. Although there are places like if you say, no, I really want the reputability of this company, you might end up not being insured by them, because if you have a low credit score, that's something to keep in mind. When we were going through our debt-free journey, there were just some natural consequences of what we were doing that it raised our score just naturally, because we were paying things off. So now the amount of utilization, that's just a fancy word for how much of your credit are you using, that went down, because as we would pay it down and then not add to it, that's why that went down and our score went up. But I recognize that we never went to zero, and I know, Cody, you said that you did go to zero, and so I'm thinking now, after just putting a little thought into it, that the reason for that is because I didn't close our accounts. Did you close all of your accounts as you were paying them off?
I did. Yes.
You did. Okay. So that probably is the difference then. So there is a way then to live debt free, like to get rid of all of your balances and such, but not necessarily get rid of the cards if you don't want to, or the lines of credit if you don't want to. And that would actually not negatively impact your credit score. Is that accurate? I really don't know. I'm asking the questions because I didn't have a focus on my credit score, because very much like you, I was like, oh, I don't need it. It's not a big deal. I have now, since becoming a coach for others, I have changed my opinion on that a little bit. But even back then, while I didn't really care that much about it, I never bought the whole thing hook, line, and sinker, where I would just get rid of all of it. So even when I cut up my cards, because I did actually cut up cards. By the way, I do use credit right now. So as you're listening to this, just know that I've gone through ebbs and flows. But even when I wasn't using any credit cards, I cut them all up. I just never took that next step to call and cancel them. So I still show like a 23-year history on one of my cards, because that's how long I've had it. Gosh, I'm really, really dating myself right now. But so I show that, whereas if I had completely closed that account and started over, I would now have, a 5-year history or something like that. So I didn't want to get rid of some of those things. And I don't know why. Like I just didn't want to. I didn't want to do that. Maybe because of insurance. What are some other things that get affected? Do you know?
Like affected by having
by having in credit or not. Jobs.
Insurance. Yeah, insurance is definitely one. Now, not all insurances,
right?
But there are definitely some. Same thing with jobs. I don't think that a majority of jobs care what your credit is, but there are some that it definitely matters.
Yeah.
So, a potential job could be in the picture. If someone wanted to do something, like maybe you have a client that wants to get into like real estate investing, it would matter then.
Okay.
Maybe you have a client that has a business and they operate off of lines of credit, it might matter then. Now, you may want to try and find a system to where they can kind of grow out of that, or at least like lessen the lines of credit.
Mm-hmm.
That would be ideal in my opinion, but it's not always possible. So that kind of thing, it matters then too.
Okay.
So, like I said, and I think that you and I have had similar journeys with this, to where like in the past we were very much so like, you really don't care because we feel like we really don't need it because we didn't want to go into debt.
Mm-hmm.
But then we've kind of changed as time has went on, to where it's like, yeah, like I think that like having credit could be a good thing. It's just it just makes things a little bit easier, but it's not like super, super necessary for everything, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like anything, right? There's the pendulum of you absolutely need it or you absolutely don't. And there's the truth is probably more in the middle in terms of convenience
Yeah.
and all of that. But lest we completely derail the conversation and make it all about whether it's important or not, I want to go back and focus on whether or not to integrate them when you are coaching your clients. And so the reason that we wanted to bring all of this stuff up, though, is because you may know that the way that we tend to coach is meeting the person where they are and understanding what that person's priorities are and what their values are. And so I would say that if somebody says, you know, hey, I really want to be a real estate investor, if they start saying the things that we know having either no or very small credit score would affect in a negative way, then we realize that okay, let's make sure that we don't ruin that on purpose. Let's do what we can to protect that because that value for them might be higher than just some, you know, arbitrary, I don't want to have debt. And like we just described a few minutes ago, you can live a debt-free life and not have all of the, like a zero credit score simply by keeping those lines open and just not utilizing them. So there is that possibility. But also if they are saying, you know what, on the flip side of this, I really, really, really don't trust myself. I have these habits that I know I have this impulsivity. I've got this compulsive. I cannot right now live with having all these lines of credit and not completely ruin my life. Then you would probably coach them in a different way. And so I think that that's super important when we say, do we integrate them? Yes, we do. And it's to the degree to which the person's values necessitate it.
That's extremely important. And I think that that's a huge part of what coaching is.
Yeah.
Is like not just focusing on the numbers, including the credit score numbers, but also like why do they or why do they not want to have a credit score or a good credit score? And, you know, what's their values look like aligned with that?
Yeah.
You know, that's what I think is really, really important. And if you have a client that like it's very important to them because they want to invest into real estate or whatever it might be, then you should coach them to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Now, to the author of this question, you didn't ask this in this way, and it might just be an implied. When you ask if you can integrate them, I don't want you to ever feel like you need to be the expert in what it is that you are doing. So for example, if you say, do I want to help them get through this, you know, to build their credit? And can I integrate that even though I don't claim to be a credit repair office, whatever they call themselves? Yes, you can integrate this into that and just realize that what you don't want to do is promise them that you're going to get them a certain number of points, you know, gained on their credit score in a certain amount of time or anything like that and charge them for that. But you can easily, there's so much information out there. You can easily Google some stuff and figure out like how is a credit score made up? You know, what are the factors that make that up? And you can help the client of yours figure out like for example, utilization. They might understand what that word even means. So what you're doing for them is helping to unpack and really understand what these different things are, and then be able to kind of lay over a transparency sheet over the credit score, like how it's made up, and take their numbers and lay that over and go, okay, here's what your specific numbers look like, and here's maybe why your score says the way that it does. So maybe we can focus on this one thing to try to build it up, or to try to, you know, shift it around a little bit. Before you even do that, I would do what Cody said earlier and just maybe have the information in the background, but do what you're going to do with them anyway, and then help them see how that path is going to naturally help raise their credit score. So that way they're not focusing specifically on that, but it's something that they're able to track.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, like you don't have to know everything about this, or you don't have to be an expert, but even telling people what makes up their credit score is huge, because so many people don't even know that. I didn't know that for a long time.
Yep.
And I talk to people every week to where like they don't know like what the 5 things are that make it up. And even like if you were to give someone that type of information, that can be really eye-opening, and that could be, that could show them like, okay, well, here's why it might be lower than what I want it to be, and here's what we need to do. So then let's work on that, and I don't see why that can't be a part of coaching. I think that's almost like what the definition of coaching is in a way.
I agree. And this is going a little bit off topic, but because I don't anticipate us doing an entire session or an entire episode specifically on building credit or anything, I'd like to just throw this in here as just a little bit of a tidbit for anyone who's working specifically with couples and or families, because that's who I typically work with. And there are a lot of families who are like, I really want to allow my kiddo to have a good credit score, and yet I don't want them to have that. I don't want them to have all of that responsibility and all of the access that comes along with that. And so one quick tidbit for you is you can actually add an authorized user to your existing cards, not even tell them about it. You don't even have to give them a card, like one will be mailed to you, but you don't even have to give that to them. And what that does, if you've got good credit, it starts assigning your stuff to them, which is fantastic. So they don't have to, spend 20 years building up that score. The utilization, it actually applies to them too. So if they've got really high lines of credit and low utilization, they're going to start actually building that score for themselves without even knowing. They're not doing anything for it. So I wouldn't suggest doing that, handing them a card and being like, go to the mall, see you later, because you will be absolutely responsible for anything that they do. But it is a nice little back end way to help them out. And, if they end up, whether it's getting a job, maybe their job is one of those that looks for credit scores, you've given them a leg up by just adding them to yours. So I just wanted to throw that in there, even though it's completely off topic. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's definitely a good point.
It's one that I've started to utilize for my kids because now they're teenagers and it's just, they don't even know they've got it. But I have their social, and obviously I'm not going to ruin it for them. And it's more of a risk for me than it is for them. There's nothing, they won't be responsible for anything that I do on that. It's actually just the other way around because they're not the owner of the accounts. They're only an authorized user. So in case anyone gets worried that I'm, using my kid's social security number to steal something, I'm not. So you all know. But anyway, I hope that helps the author of the question. And if you have any other questions, feel free to send them just as she did. I believe that was Lizzie. So we'll go ahead and give a shout out to Lizzie and just say thank you so much for listening and for sending in that question to podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. And I think that's it for today.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for helping us unpack that, Cody. I always love doing those questions with you because it's like sometimes we're on the same page, sometimes we're not. And I think that's what makes for such a fun discussion here.
It makes it spicy.
Yeah, spicy. All right, you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our host by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching. Music provided by Summer School.